The U.S. National Security Agency has launched some 1,000 cyber attacks on China's Northwestern Polytechnical University, or NPU. This is according to an investigation report released early September by China's National Computer Virus Emergency Response Center and the cybersecurity company 360. The report lists a clear and complete chain of evidence which calls out an NSA-affiliated office as the perpetrator of the attacks. The Office of Tailored Access Operation, or TAO, has carried out over 10,000 malicious attacks against Chinese targets in recent years, according to the report, and 140 gigabytes of high-value data has been stolen from the NPU. It's been a week since China demanded an explanation from the United States, but so far there is no response. What are the purposes of these attacks? What does the investigation tell us about the scale of U.S. cyber espionage against China and possibly beyond? And what has China and why has China warned of a jungle world in global cyberspace? I'm pleased to be joined from New York by David Auerbach, a former software engineer with Microsoft and Google and author of Bitwise, A Life in Code, a book about computer languages and codes, and from Zhuhai, southern China's Guangdong province, by Professor Zhang Fan, associate professor at Beijing Normal University. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. So, the investigation report points directly to TAO, as I mentioned, affiliated with the NSA. The report says the TAO used some 40 specialized cyber weapons, consistently cyber attacked the university and stole core technical data. For instance, the attacks and data theft against China involved 13 personnel in the United States, more than 60 contracts, and some 170 digital documents with the U.S. telecom operators. The NSA has also been found to have long carried out indiscriminate audio surveillance against Chinese cell phone users, illegally stowed text messages, and conducted wireless positioning of these people. Professor Zhang, what do these numbers tell you, and why NPU in particular?
Right. So these numbers just says if the NSA surveillance into China, the hacking, is really a widespread thing. I mean, as far back as 2009, Edward Snowden already told South China Morning Post that there's a widespread NSA hacking into China and Hong Kong, and later on, there's all sorts of reporting coming out as well. In particular for this one, the reason why they want to hack into that particular university is because it's engaged in something called my opinion, the most important thing they're looking for is this hypersonic technology. Just before the hacking, that university tested an engine that's a combination of something called a ramjet and a scramjet, and as well as a rocket engine. What it does is it can fly at up to 4 times the speed of sound using ramjet, and up to seven times using the scramjet, and fly all the way out of the atmosphere using the rocket engine. So that capability will be very useful for something called space planes. It's like an airplane, but it can fly outside the atmosphere and arrive at anywhere on Earth within an hour. And this kind of technology will be very useful for the U.S. because their military has this doctrine called prompt global strike, for which they want to strike anywhere in the world within an hour. And given how problematic their current hypersonic weapons program is going, you can imagine why there's motive to go after that university, go after that attack.
Mr. Auerbach, how do you look at the Chinese report and the information that the U.S. carries out massive espionage operations around the world, which is really not surprising, but what has caught your attention about these attacks and theft against NPU as outlined in this report?
Yes, to echo our other guests, that some of this was out there, and I think in the West at least the reaction has been something of a lack of surprise and sort of the understanding that in fact these sorts of activities were already at least unofficially acknowledged to be the sorts of activities taking place. So the question in my mind is what we're learning from the sort of war of words that is occurring and what impact this may have on diplomacy and the public images of the two countries, and perhaps why it is that what actions the United States may have taken that might have caused China to be interested in raising awareness of this right now, in particular the arrests of certain Chinese nationals and the attempts to restrict Huawei's global activities. Unfortunately, at this point, those links are somewhat speculative, but it does seem that the overall temperature is heating up, and that this is one more indication of that.
What do you think of what Professor Zhang just talked about, the U.S. special interest in that hypersonic research that's been carried out at the NPU? From
that, yeah. Unfortunately, that is not unfortunately my area. It being more military, my understanding is more in the realm of the technological side. So I'm certain that the United States certainly has an interest in a wide variety of Chinese activities. I cannot speak to that particular research, other than that this university would certainly be a likely target for this kind of espionage work.
Professor Zhang, the NPU was hacked by 41 types of weapons and infiltrated with over 1,000 attack links, according to the report. So you have particularly mentioned that the U.S. is particularly interested in this university. Still, is it usual for the United States to try to steal this kind of technology from other countries, which is not as developed overall as the United States, or in terms of weapon systems? What does that tell us about possibly the kind of anxiety the United States is having over the level of development China has achieved on its own?
Right. So this is something pretty new, I would say, in particular vis-a-vis China. I mean, in the past, there are other countries that has more advanced technologies than the U.S. At birth of the United States, Britain had a lot more advanced technology. So the father of industry in the U.S., Sam Slater, is actually called a traitor in the UK because he stole technology from the UK. But in China's case, in the past, it's lagging technology. In particular, the hypersonic technology is a little different. It's completely new, so everybody's on the same starting point. So that gives China a chance to temporarily, at least, sort of pull ahead a little. So the U.S. is in a awkward position where it is trying to, well, in your words, steal technology, but at the same time has to justify its superiority sort of complex in a way. So it will be quite interesting to see the mental gymnastics going on. If you go by the international forums, then it's quite interesting. For example, the U.S. tech companies are also copying Chinese tech companies' payment technology, short format videos and stuff like that. But they're at the same time, they're being condescending and a little racist while they're doing that. So that's kind of a very interesting psychological thing going on there. So yeah, it's certainly something new, and probably see more of in the future.
Wang Lei, who is the coordinator for cyber affairs of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, responded to the issue on September the 6th. Let's take a listen to this.
The U.S., by taking arbitrary and wanton actions in cyberspace, did not comply with any international rules and completely walked away from the China-U.S. cybersecurity agreement reached in 2015. The existing consensus between China and the U.S. in cyberspace has changed radically. If the U.S. insists on U.S. exceptionalism or U.S. first and refuses to take reasonable actions nor abide by any international rules, cyberspace may eventually turn into a jungle world. This is not in line with the common interest of the international community.
Mr. Auerbach, how do you look at the jungle world warning that China is issuing? And Does the United States follow any rules in cyberspace? Should there be some kind of rules established in cyberspace governance?
I guess from my perspective, we're already there. That certainly one can't go more than a couple days without hearing of some sort of attack from some often state-sponsored agency on some enemy. And the history of such attacks goes back a ways. So it's hard for me to look back and see some much in the way of détente even before now, but rather I think an escalation of wanting to raise that perception in the world and make people more aware of what has been going on. And the reasons for that, again, may be related to greater political or economic interests on the part of either country.
The report also found that in order to carry out these attacks and thefts against China, the U.S. has used 54 so-called jumpers or proxy servers distributed in 17 countries, mostly surrounding China, such as Japan and the Republic of Korea. Wang Lei has described these actions as muddying the waters and fishing for arbitrage. So, Professor Zhang, how do you look at how this works, and what's the implication for these countries, and what's the implication for China in terms of a cybersecurity environment?
First of all, I want to clarify, they're not necessarily complicit in this action. They're being hacked first.
Okay.
Right. Their servers being hacked first, and then their computers are being used without their knowledge. So it is quite common knowledge that the U.S. also spies on its allies. For example, the famous problem with Germany. And also, the Swiss company called the Crypto AG, which is the CIA front that had been selling defective encryptions to a lot of governments, 120 governments. So that obviously include their own allies. So the U.S. by involving them in this kind of attacks, that really. It's first of all unnecessary. They got found out in the end, anyways, and also they're trying to sort of divert China's possible retaliation against these countries. That's not really what allies should be doing. So that's just not really.
Finally,
something out there.
Yeah, finally, David, I want to ask you this. Every time we talk about this, there is a sense of helplessness because, as I said, it's common knowledge that the U.S. does this, probably other countries as well, and that the U.S. is the NSA has long carried out indiscriminate audio surveillance against Chinese cell phone users, illegally stole our text messages, and conducted wireless positioning. Do we just have to accept that?
I think it is really up to the security apparatuses of any given state as well as the political apparatuses as to what they want to negotiate. Certainly, intelligence agencies are historically aggressive, but I would have to assume that China has been aware of most of these activities long before now. And I have to assume they've been taking some steps against them. So I think that question should probably be directed at the state, because from my perspective, the efforts are certainly going to continue. That status quo has been in place arguably for decades. So what comes of it as far as counter-espionage tactics, I think there's no shortage of potential there, but I can't speak to what is actually being developed. But certainly, in terms of the efforts being made, yes, I think that status quo will continue on all sides.
Thank you so much, David. Auerbach joining us from the United States and Zhang Fan joining us from southern China.